Try again, folks. I appreciate you all very much. We were so briefly delayed, and now we're going to give you a concert of Irish music. Hi, everyone. I love when I get that response. As a teacher, it warms my heart. My name is Phoenix Crockett, and I am the managing director of Me2 Burlington, which is the orchestra you see before you tonight. Me2 is the world's only classical music organization built for people who experience mental illness and for those who support them. Welcome to our stigma-free zone. We live in a world where people who experience mental illnesses are discriminated against and stigmatized, and our rehearsals, our performances, these are places for education, for discussion, for acceptance, and for intentional community surrounding these issues. One of the things you'll see tonight is that we try to poke away at the inherent elitism in classical music. We try to hold space in a way that is not above anyone else, that is open to everyone. You noticed our shows are free. There's no dress code, of course, here. We're all going to work together to create this space where anything is welcome and everyone is welcome. You'll see these kinds of spaces not only here, but in any of our orchestras. We've expanded over the years. Our Boston Orchestra just had a show. Our Manchester Orchestra has been doing quite well. And if orchestra is not your bag, we also have choruses. There's a flute choir. Who knows what groups they're coming up with these days. Burlington is our flagship group, and we're just about getting towards our 15th anniversary of putting this together. Thank you. Thank you. It's almost my 10th anniversary being part of the group too, and it's wonderful to see how it's grown and how our outreach has affected this community. Sometimes we play in correctional facilities, we play in school gyms, lawns that we like, the airport at one point, and sometimes we are so blessed by an actual music hall, and Ellie Long has been just a wonderful home for us over time. So big thanks to Ellie Long, and I know there's some staff around who are helping me out earlier today and answering my emails when I send them late at night or what it may be. But we really love this venue. In our stigma-free zone, as I mentioned, acceptance is the expectation, patience is encouraged, and supporting each other is really what it's all about. And I hope that you feel that tonight as you listen to these amazing musicians play their music, and you hear us talk about that music, and I'll continue to talk, and as will the rest of us here. One quick housekeeping note. All of what you see, all of this that is being put on, and the lights and the chairs and the things and the people, is just us. We don't hire staff, we keep it rather community-based, which means that at the end of the show, if you or the people you are around are able, and you could stack your chairs back there, then I don't have to do it, which has gone poorly several times in the past. You'll see a couple of our traditions tonight, get a feel of what's going on. One such tradition, and one of my favorite, is that before every rehearsal and performance, we take an intentional moment to take a few deep breaths. This sounds like a small thing, but of course, perhaps now more than ever, it's a very important skill to be practicing. Here to bring that to you before the orchestra tunes is Marguerite.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. As Phoenix mentioned, one of our traditions is to take a mindful moment before we begin, and I invite you to join us tonight. So, please find your feet flat on the floor. Let a little tension from your shoulders go. You can close your eyes or lower your gaze. I'll count our first breath, and then you'll take the next 3 on your own time. Okay, let's breathe in, 2, 3, 4, and out, 2, 3, 4. Thank you very much. We will tune and then we will welcome Michael Colburn to the stage.
There we go. Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for that warm welcome. And welcome to St. Patrick's Day program that we have entitled Songs of Erin. We began the program with a work by Leroy Anderson, a noted longtime collaborator with Arthur Fiedler in the Boston Pops. And that was the ensemble and the conductor that he created the work that you just heard. It's part of several Irish tunes that he put together in something called an Irish suite, and we'll be going back to that piece several times here tonight. He wrote that suite at the request of an Irish society in Boston, specifically for use with the Boston Pops. And so he created initially a set of 4 tunes, and they were so popular that a few years later he added 2 more to those, and again published that set as the Irish Suite. The name of the tune you just heard is The Girl I Left Behind Me. It's an old Irish folk tune. As is the case with a lot of these folk tunes, the history is a little murky. There's the melody, and then there are actually the lyrics, and sometimes they kind of develop separately, and that was definitely the case with this particular selection. But in 1840, this melody with those words were published for the first time. And this song was not only popular in Ireland, where it was often associated with soldiers going off to war, or sailors going out to sea and saying goodbye to their loved ones. Not only was it popular in Ireland, but it became very popular in America as well, and actually was used as a marching song for the U.S. Army during the 19th century. We're going to continue now with the music of Australian-American composer Percy Aldridge Grainger. And you may be wondering, wait a second, Australia and America, what does that have to do with Ireland? Well, Grainger was very, very fond of folk music from the British Isles. And this next selection that you're going to hear was one of his absolute favorite melodies. In fact, he said it many, many different times for different ensembles. It's entitled The Irish Tune from County Derry. And when you hear it, you may be asking yourself, well, wait a second, that's Danny Boy. Why didn't he just call it Danny Boy? Well, because that song existed long before those lyrics were written. Those lyrics for Danny Boy were written in the early 20th century. And this particular melody was one that Grainger found in an Irish folk tune collection that was published in 1840. As I mentioned, he published it and arranged it for a number of different settings. This is the latest of those. It was done in 1950 at the request of noted composer Leopold Stokowski, who had discovered Grainger's music in the 1940s and was so taken by it that he wanted to do a recording of all of Grainger's music, but he wanted his own special arrangement, so Grainger was more than happy to do that. You may notice a couple of unusual things about this, especially if you're familiar with the band setting or some of the other settings that Grainger did. This is scored a little differently. It begins with the strings, but then all of a sudden you're going to notice a guest instrument from the back of the ensemble, and that is going to be played by Ethan, our principal trombone. Ethan, you want to hold up the euphonium? So this is an instrument that you don't often find in orchestral settings. But Grainger and Stokowski both felt like this was the perfect tone color to mesh with the strings in this tune. So this is the Irish tune from County Derry. So we're going to turn back to Leroy Anderson for our next selection, The Wearing of the Green. This is another Irish tune that has kind of a murky history, except we do know that it was used as a protest song for the suppression of the Irish Rebellion of 1798. And the lyrics are actually rather intense and kind of dark, which might surprise you when you hear the setting that you're about to listen to, which is very upbeat. It's very optimistic sounding, and you may notice an especially unusual scoring technique that Leroy Anderson used. If you've gone to many orchestra concerts, you probably have noticed that occasionally the string instruments, instead of using their bow, will pluck the strings in a technique called pizzicato, which is not that unusual. What is unusual is the amount of pizzicato that you're going to hear in this next selection. These strings, I don't think you guys pick up your bows at all during this, right? They're just going to be plucking away on this thing. And it really does imbue this music with a wonderful sense of optimism and joy. This is Wearing of the Green by Leroy Anderson. For our next selection, we're going to turn to legendary film composer John Williams and a film score that he created for a movie entitled Far and Away. You can be forgiven if you may not remember much about this movie. Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman were the stars back when they were married to each other. They played a married couple in the movie. And the movie was okay, but really the best thing about the movie, and so often this is said about John Williams films, the best thing is the music, right? And it's the music that really perseveres. And the suite that you're going to hear now is entirely composed of melodies that John Williams created. And I emphasize that point because much of what we've heard tonight has been based on Irish folk tunes. And when you hear this music, it's going to sound so Irish and so familiar to you that you'll probably be thinking, oh, that must have been a folk tune. But this is part of the genius of John Williams. When he was hired to score this film, he embraced the challenge of creating original material that still sounded and felt Irish. And part of that is just his own sense of how to create a melody that has that kind of Irish quality. And part of it is in the instruments that he used. So there's, in fact, an Irish drum. Nathan, can you hold up the drum back here so everyone can see this? So you're going to hear this when one of the first party scenes kind of breaks out in the music. It's the Irish drum that's going to set the tone for this. But then he also uses other techniques like that kind of drone sound that you heard earlier in some of the earlier Leroy Anderson selections, and just some other techniques that make this music sound so authentically Irish, even though it all came from the brilliant mind of John Williams. This is the suite from Far and Away. So we're back to another selection that is often thought of as an Irish folk tune, but actually was composed by an Irish poet, a poet and a musician, back in 1813. The poet's name is Moore, and the name of the tune is The Minstrel Boy. It's a poem and a song that tells the story of a young soldier who's also a musician who goes off to war, never to return. Unlike Leroy Anderson's earlier setting of The Wearing of the Green, which was perhaps surprisingly optimistic, this setting is actually quite somber and melancholy, quite simple in its approach, but I think all the more beautiful and noble because of its simplicity. This is Anderson's The Minstrel Boy. Our next two selections, we're going to do them together as one connected set. Songs of Erin and the Boys of Wexford are Irish folk tunes that were arranged by the legendary arranger and composer Sammy Nestico. Some of you may know that name if you're jazz aficionados. Sammy was one of the chief arrangers for the Count Basie Orchestra for many, many years. But before he went out west to work with Count Basie, he made his living in Washington, D.C. as an arranger for first the United States Air Force Band and then eventually for the U.S. Marine Band, my old outfit. And it was during his time in the Marine Band that he created these arrangements that you're about to hear. And kind of an interesting backstory about why he created these arrangements. I'm sure many of you know that John F. Kennedy, President John Kennedy, had Irish heritage, and during his time as president had a very meaningful trip back to his homeland, back to Ireland. And while he was there, he was presented with a couple of collections of Irish folk tunes. And when he came back from Ireland, he met with the director of the Marine Band and said that he had these collections of tunes. There was one in particular called the Boys of Wexford that he really loved, and he hoped that a Marine Band arranger might be able to create a setting for him to listen to. Well, that's all the word that, of course, we needed to hear in the Marine Band, and Sammy Nestico set about creating this arrangement of the Boys of Wexford, and Kennedy loved it so much that apparently he would listen to it on Air Force One, he would listen to it before he went to bed at night. He was so fond of it that Sammy created this additional set, the Songs of Erin, because he knew how much it meant to President Kennedy. So just kind of an interesting backstory to this music, how it came about, and just for me it's a very meaningful story because one of our goals in the Marine Band is, of course, always to do whatever we can to please the President and to take care of the White House. And this is just a stellar example of how Sammy Nestico did that. This is Songs of Erin and the Boys from Wexford. Well, before we finish things up with one more Leroy Anderson favorite, I want to thank all of you for coming out here to celebrate St. Patrick's Day with us. When I found out that this concert fell on March 17th, I thought, oh boy, we're going to have fun with this program. And I hope you enjoyed listening to it as much as we've enjoyed playing it. Our final selection is indeed another work by Leroy Anderson. The Rakes of Mallow is the tune that is the melody that he has fun with, and boy does he have fun with this particular tune. The Rakes, of course, I think most of us know what a rake is. He's a gentleman perhaps of questionable character who likes to have a good time, and the Rakes of Mallow apparently really had a good time. And Leroy Anderson also just has a wonderful time with this melody, giving it first to the solo bassoon. So we're going to put Kate front and center here to get the party started with the Rakes of Mallow. And then you're going to hear that tune just gets traded all around the ensemble, and it gets faster, and it gets faster, and it gets faster. So we're going to crank things up here right at the very end of the show. We, again, thank you for coming out tonight, and hope you enjoy the Rakes of Mallow. coming. Good night. Thank you all.